Alright, so I'm back, and today we're going to do another Rant of the Week. Before we get into that topic for today, I actually do have some new figures new-ish figures that we'll do. Probably not full reviews on, but at least overviews. Shout out to Chris. He hooked me up with a KO MP Black Arachnia. So we'll take a quick look at her. You know, we're not going to do like the transformation. I don't think we'll do transformation on pretty much any of the things I just got in. But we'll look at them. So the MP Black Arachnia, which was a pretty decent figure. I'll go into more detail with him. And he also sent me the Fans Toys cup. He actually got me a pretty good deal on it. Just it didn't have the Target Masters, so sure, why not? Pretty good deal. I haven't decided if I'm going to do the transformation or not on that one yet. Because it goes back into if it's not readily available to get replacement parts for, I'm kind of hesitant to do it. And since it's not that it costs me a lot of money, I just don't have any way to get parts for it. So it's one of those I have to kind of weigh that out. I might just do an overview of the figure. But we shall see. I'm not sure. I just don't know yet. And then today I got the KO MP44 in, and I got the KO Shadow Panther in. So we've already done the review on the MP44 mold with the Nemesis Prime, so I won't be doing the transformation, but we'll do a brief look at the figure itself, and my recommendations on it. And same with the Shadow Panther. I've already done the review of both Cheetor and Shadow Panther, so KO version. I had actually sold mine because I was like, I don't need it, and then almost instantly was like, man, I wish I hadn't done that. So I didn't want to buy the official, and then the KO, I saw the KO coming out, and I was like, well, maybe I'll pick that up and then hit two birds with one stone and see how these KO Beast War figures are, because I did kind of want to toy with the idea of having robot modes and beast modes for the Beast Wars, because it's like with G1, it's like, yeah, sure, Starscream turns into a jet, it's cool looking, but it's like is it cool enough looking for me to have one displayed in jet mode? It's like, no, I don't think so. I don't think the alt modes for most of the G1 characters have enough character in themselves to be interesting. Whereas in Beast Wars, they spent, especially Season 1, they spent a good portion of their time in beast modes. So it's kind of like Primal, for example. He spent so much time as the gorilla that the gorilla mode is almost as an important character as the robot mode. So it's kind of like, for me, it's like a different kind of thing, because they did more in their alt modes, whereas in the G1 it was just more an alt mode, and it was more of a tool than it was a character. So anyway, that's an idea I'm toying with. Now that I got the Black Arachnia, now it's like, okay, now we can really dive into it and see if it's worthwhile or not. There's that. So we've got at least a few figures to look at. Plus, we'll continue doing the new series that we just talked about, where I'm just going to go, how are they holding up with the next figure in the line, which I'm guessing might be MP Ramjet. I'm just going on my shelves and just kind of going straight across on the top shelf. So I think Ramjet might be next up on the MP Conehead molds, because I got the MP Thrust on the way too. So maybe we'll just look at both of them briefly when they show up. But we'll see, one step at a time, right? Anyway, let's get into the Rant of the Week this week. And this topic kind of goes into topics that we've had discussed on this channel a few times in the recent past. But now it's in general, prequels. I have decided that I really hate prequels. If done right, a prequel should be able to add to a story. But I think there are 3 times where a prequel movie or series has actually helped. Most of the time, they end up hurting the series as a whole. And so let's give some examples of these. Here's an example of a few that actually work pretty well. Number 1, with the movies anyway, you have The Hobbit as the prequel to Lord of the Rings. This works really well. I think there's a couple flaws in it, but it works really well, but it's not because they did it as a prequel. It's because it wasn't written as a prequel. It was written as the original, or the children's story that leads into Lord of the Rings. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, then The Lord of the Rings. So it naturally flows better than most movies where it's like, I'm going to make this movie, and then I'm going to make this movie, and then I'm going to make this movie. And it's just like, wait, what? You're going to go back in time, and then you're going to go back further? At first I was like, man, just anything that has more stories of these characters. And now it's more of like, I don't know, guys. Let's see. Another one that works pretty well is the Star Wars prequel series. But, Lucas really spent a long time working on those. It wasn't just a cash grab like other prequels are. You just watch, most movies that have a prequel in it, it's usually like, oh, they're just needing to cash out those bucks for X character, and it just doesn't quite work. And then, its flaw in there, which I've said many times on here before, is the fact that it just kind of changed Vader from being this badass who personally hunted down all the Jedi and killed them all, to, well, he did kill a bunch of kids. It's like it hurt the series as a whole, but I don't think it hurt it bad enough to really do lasting permanent damage to the original trilogy. And then what was the other? Oh, Star Trek Enterprise. Now, the show itself wasn't all that great, and I'm sure there were some flaws that were thrown in there that made things not make sense, but there are 3 elements in that show that actually help tell stories later on that were already told, and it actually works out pretty well if you're into Star Trek like I am. For example, the first few times they come across the Romulans in Enterprise, they made sure that the humans, like the crew, never actually see the Romulans. And that's important because in Enterprise, or in the original series, it wasn't until I can't remember the name of the show or the episode, but there's an episode, and they actually just kind of played into it with Strange New Worlds, which was a great episode too. That's a prequel that's starting to pay off pretty well, but it still has problems. But where they finally see the Romulans and they realize the Romulans are related to Vulcans, and it creates some animosity among the crew because of Spock. So it was really important that they didn't show the Romulans in Enterprise. And when they did, they showed them in a way where the humans never actually see them. And it was also cool, as a side note, that they actually put the Remans in there, because the Remans never existed until the Nemesis movie. But in the Nemesis movie, they were saying how the Remans have always been around. So it's kind of cool to see the Remans actually doing something other than existing off screen. So that was kind of cool. Another thing that they actually fixed canon-wise was the Klingons. Because at the beginning of Enterprise, they look like regular Klingons. And then if you remember from the original series, they don't look like the Klingons. So in the original Enterprise, they looked like modern Klingons, or the more popularized Klingons, I should say. Like Worf. There. But then in the original series, they didn't look like that. They just looked like regular people for the most part. So there was this gap of like, why do these ones in the original series look like humans, but these ones before and these ones after look like what we've we've grown to love on Klingons? Like, where does that fit in? And they answered it that the Klingons actually used some of the neogenics projects from Earth to try and develop super soldiers, essentially, which ended up, because they were merging the biological of human and Klingon, that's what made their ridges reduce and make them look human. And eventually they get that fixed by the end of the show, but they said it's going to take hundreds of years for it to actually take full effect. And it's like, all right, okay. You know, it's like it actually fixed that bit of storytelling. And then the last one was the fact that they come across the Borg. They never hear about what the Borg, the name of the Borg, but because they do come across the Borg, and the Borg in that Enterprise show end up sending a message to the Borg. So it's one of those funky timeline things where they send the message to the future, or not to the future, but to the collective in the past, but it takes so long to get there that by the time it gets there, we're talking now we're in the next generation, and then they sent a cube out to go see what's going on, and as the cube's coming out, that's when Q puts the Enterprise in the way, and that's their first interaction with the Borg. But the cube was already on its way towards Earth, if you guys know your Star Trek lore. So it's just one of those, it's like, had the events of First Contact not happened, and the Borg weren't in the Enterprise show, then the cube would never have been headed towards Earth. But if the cube never was headed towards Earth, then they couldn't have stopped. It's one of those time things. But it was one of those, it creates a perfect circle in the timeline. And it's like, okay, that's actually pretty cool. So those are the elements in a prequel that's thus far I've seen that work real well. Those are the three that stick out to me that are like, okay, these are good. Almost every other prequel, though, that I've ever seen has gone off the rails. If you remember, because I kind of do, many, many, many years ago when Batman Begins came out, they kind of were saying that it was a prequel to the Keaton Batman. But they changed so many elements of it that, they're like, and it was a popular movie, so they just kind of progressed into a new series. Or they were just kind of just saying that to kind of get you invested. But it's like, there's a prequel, if it was a prequel, that just completely fails being a prequel because it reboots the series. Bumblebee is a good example too, where it was shot as a prequel, but because the people that wrote the movie and directed the movie they didn't care enough about the story that's already been told, that they decided that they're just going to tell their own story. So it's a prequel, sequel, reboot. And it's like, it makes no sense whatsoever. If you look at that in any kind of timeline with the rest of Transformers movies, it makes absolutely no sense. The video game, Fall of Cybertron, was originally supposed to be kind of a prequel to G1, but they added so many elements that don't exist in G1 until later on in the G1 cartoon. For example, like the aerial bots and stuff like that it quickly turns into this nightmarish, like, well, we've got to reboot it. Essentially, like, it creates its own thing, and then then they kind of change it that it's a prequel to Transformers Prime, which also makes absolutely no sense. When you actually sit there and you see the Fall of War and Fall of Cybertron games, and then you compare them to the story that we get in Prime, it's like, this makes no sense whatsoever. If you're sitting there saying that these guys are in the same continuity, which they do say, or at least they did. Let's see, other prequels, and mid-series stuff too, that just don't make sense. For example, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show that we just watched. I just went through all of that in the Obi-Wan Kenobi reviews, and it doesn't make sense with the canon within the universe for things like, oh, I just defeated the biggest bad guy in the world, I'm going to let him live. See ya. I'm going to let him do whatever he wants to do. Makes no sense. Let's see, the Han Solo movie. Here's a prequel, and basically because of the way they make it sound is that Han is the one that originally created the rebellion by giving him all the money and stuff, and it's like that makes no sense whatsoever canon wise, because later on when Han is joining the Rebel Alliance, nobody seems to remember oh yeah, this is the guy that started the Rebel Alliance just a few years ago. It makes no sense. And then if you put it in context of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, this takes place 10 years before A New Hope, so it's about the same timeline, around the same time as the Han Solo movie. But the rebellion's already kind of going, and that they were created to just help Jedi, and it's like, wait, so did they create the rebellion to help Jedi, or did Han create the rebellion by accident because he didn't want to keep that money? Which one is it? And then that Han was always the hero, and not just, a space pirate that was down on his luck because he was not very good at being a space pirate. Things like that, when a prequel comes out, I'm just sitting there, I'm like, it makes me worry, and makes me not excited to see a show. It's one thing to do a flashback in an episode or two, of a show, and, here pop in my head is, in the X-Men cartoon, you have a couple flashbacks that show Wolverine's backstory and how he became Wolverine. And you also have a flashback of Cyclops before he had his powers, really. Things like that. It's like, okay, you get a little bit more story of these characters. Or one of my personal favorites was when they showed the origin of Mr. Sinister, and and his story was incredible in comparison to other stories that we get, for prequels. But it's like, these aren't really prequels. You can't really call them prequels. They're just flashbacks, just kind of, here's how these characters got there. Here's a good example of another prequel that is just, it was garbage at first. And that was the Discovery show, Star Trek Discovery. That first season of Star Trek Discovery makes no sense canon-wise. Their technology in that show is so far advanced that it's something that even the Next Generation crew didn't have access to. I mean, automatically teleporting halfway across the galaxy because your ship spins around. I mean, it makes no sense when you put it in context of the lore that's already created. The Klingons look completely different than they do in any other canon whatsoever. So it's like, where are these Klingons coming from? This story of how the Klingons were just then coming together right before the original series to form the Empire makes no sense, because Klingon has always had a warrior race, and it's always been connected like that. Those are the kind of things that's just like, wait, what? You mean the Klingons are just now coming together? And they're the way they're coming together is because they found this old derelict ship that had cloaking technology, and then if you go in there and you worship it, it gives your new ship cloaking technology. It makes no sense. None of it makes sense. And season 1 was just such a train wreck. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek. I will continue to watch reruns of Star Trek. Even when I was it's time to watch an Obi-Wan show, I'm like, you know what? I'd rather watch a rerun of Deep Space Nine. And that was one of the most boring Star Trek shows there is. So it's like, I'd rather watch that than watch Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's where my mindset is. But the big thing with it is just, I will never rewatch the first season of Discovery ever. It's not happening. It will not happen. Season 2, when Pike comes in and he starts fixing the show, it starts getting better. And now that he's got his own show, it's like it's still like he's trying to fix the universe and all the problems that the Discovery show created. And it's like it's going to take a while for them to actually fix everything that happened. It's just not good writing as a prequel. And that's what I don't like about prequels. It's like, if they throw out what's canon to make the story good, then what's the point? You know, you've just ruined the thing that I wanted to watch. I want to watch more of X. I don't want to see Y. You know, I don't want to see this new story that's going to contradict X and make X look either weak or evil, or, you know, whatever you want to put in there. You know, it's just like, you know, it doesn't make sense in canon wise, you know, certain things. You know, and, you know, this is a flaw of the original series, but it is stated in there that at the time, women weren't allowed to be captains of the ship. But in the show Discovery, which takes place before the original series, there's a woman captain. So it's like, it's contradicting itself. And I'm not sitting here, you know, advocating that women can never be Starfleet captains. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, in canon-wise, that's what they say in the show. And for them to go back in time and do a prequel where this wasn't the case, and then everybody on the ship, it doesn't make it hurts the story. Because before, you know, we had a pretty good story on Star Trek lore that all makes sense, you know, from one end to the other for the most part. There's a few stretches of imagination you have to throw in there. But it's the same thing with Star Wars. It's like, you know, you just look at the main 9 movies, and it actually makes pretty good sense from episode 1 to episode 9. If you take it as face value. You know, I know a lot of people have flaws. You know, they have gripes with those movies. I do too. Episode 8 is one of my least favorite movies I've ever seen. And then it's like, you throw in the Rogue One. Rogue One's there's a good example of one that worked out pretty well, where it amplifies the story and helps the character, but doesn't take characters of episode 4, but it doesn't take away from everything else. Although if you do watch that and then you watch episode 4, you're just like, man, this slowed down a lot. Like, plot and story wise, this is a slow build as opposed to what I was just watching. And the graphics, the graphics. But when you add so much filler in there, so it's like, you know, you got episodes 1 through 9, and that's pretty good. You have Rogue One in there, and it's like, okay, that fits in. But then you throw in Solo, and it's like, huh? And then you throw in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and it's like, huh? And then you throw in, you know, all the Mandalorian shows and the Book of Boba Fett, and you're just sitting there like, wait a minute. And then you throw in the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch, and let's see. Technically, I think all the Ewok movies, I think there was like 2 of them. Those would be canon too, and the Christmas special. And now you're just sitting there like, this is just garbage. You know, it starts hurting the franchise as a whole. And it's like, you know, I'm not against revisiting characters, but like, let's take it in a linear path. We don't need to see how Kirk got his car, you know, in Star Trek, you know, or, you know, how he, you know, his birth. We don't need to see that. You know, it was an important element for J.J. Abrams' like offshoot Kelvin universe, but it's like, if that was a true prequel to the original series, I don't need to see that. I don't want to see that. I want to see, you know, Voyager, you know, had gotten back to the Alpha Quadrant, you know, and then Star Trek Nemesis happened. It's like, I want to see what happened after that. I don't want to see what happened before that. I already know what happened before that. That's the other problem with prequels, if not done right, is, you know, like, take the Obi-Wan. I'm not trying to trash Obi-Wan Kenobi here, but it's just a recent example. But it's one of those examples that really paints the picture I'm trying to to say, because you have these characters that are in the show that are in episode 3 and then they're in episode 4. So there is nothing in this show that's going to be of an actual risk to these characters. Obi-Wan will not die. He will not die. He's not going to lose his hand. He's not going to get dismembered. He's going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. Leia is not going to get kidnapped. She's going to get kidnapped by the Sith, but they're not going to kill her and destroy her. She will be okay. Luke will not be killed by Raven, randomly in the desert. It's not going to happen. It's going to be Luke will be okay. Raven's going to either die or go off on her own. Vader's going to live. Obi-Wan's going to live. There is no real conflict in this show that's going to have any lasting impact on the story. Same with like The Mandalorian. At least with The Mandalorian, for the most part, they're trying to stick to stories that don't have much connection to the canon. At least originally. Now they do, because like Luke's in there and all that stuff. And then things like in the Clone Wars, which again I didn't watch because I couldn't do it. But there's the end of the Clone Wars series, which I know happens. Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Dooku, and then which leads right into the movie, and then they fight Dooku, and it's like, oh, we haven't seen each other in a while. So that's the classic case of either the movie didn't watch the prequel or the prequel show or the in-between show because they didn't care, or the in-between show didn't really care about what happened in the movie because they want to make this conflict here the best that they can make it. And that's what I don't like. They're doing this House of Dragons show for the prequel to Game of Thrones, and it's like, I don't want to see a prequel to Game of Thrones. I really don't. I know what happens. I already know the story. They've said the story many times in the show. I don't care. I don't want to see it all play out. However, I wouldn't mind seeing where all the characters end up in another season or two. What happened to the rest of the Dothraki? Where did Jon Snow end up? Where did Arya Stark end up? Where did these characters end up? They all went their separate ways, but I want to see that story. You could do a spin-off story of Arya Stark doing all this stuff. And it's like, okay, I actually think I might want to watch that. I don't know if I actually would, but I'm just saying, it's like, I'd be more inclined to watch that than watching the prequel with a bunch of characters that I don't care about, don't know about, and won't want to know about, because I know where they end up at the end of the story. I know all the dragons start dying out. I know they all start getting smaller and smaller and smaller until Daenerys' dragons come out. So it's like there is no conflict here. It's just the same. It's got to go back to status quo by the end of it. So there's not going to be any I can't believe they did that. It's going to be like, well, they said that happened in the original show, so of course it's going to happen. And I don't get me wrong. I have equal reservations on the Lord of the Rings show that they're doing. I would rather watch Legolas and Gimli going off on adventures, and just, wandering through the woods and then wandering through the caves. I would rather watch that than watch a prequel to Lord of the Rings. I am very nervous about that. I love The Lord of the Rings. It's my all-time favorite movie. And then The Hobbit was also really good. I don't know if I'd put it in my all-time grades, but it was a pretty good show, and they work together. But I don't want to watch the prequel. Everything that happens in this, The Rings of Power, I think it's called. Everything that happens in this, they tell you at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings. They created rings, 3 rings for the elves, 7 rings for the dwarves, 9 rings for men, and then 1 ring for the Dark Lord, and with his ring, he corrupted the other rings one by one. That's why all the 9 became the Nazgul. And it's like, it's like, I know this story. I don't need to watch it play out. If done right, sure, I'll watch it play out. But if they're just kind of going off on their own, and from what I understand, they have done that already with certain elements of it, which, we'll see how it plays out. But it's just like, certain elements of it make me go, I don't know. Like, I don't want to see... here's another good example. Many years ago, I was pretty big at buying comics. I'd ride my bike down to the grocery store, once every couple weeks just to check out to see if there's new comics. And all the Spider-Man's comics did this special issue called, it was -1. And in these -1 comics, they were showing origins of, or not origins, but just like what happened to these characters before there was Spider-Man, before all of this happened. And I had 2 of them, one of which showed the origin of a character called Proto-Goblin, which I don't think we ever saw again. And it was Green Goblin experimenting with the serum, and he created this red goblin type thing. And it's one of those that's like, okay, that kind of tells a little bit of a story, but it wasn't all that necessary. And then there was this other one that just showed Flash Thompson's abuse as a child, and it's like, I don't want to see this. This doesn't help the story. We know he was abused as a child. We don't need to see it. Just, things like that. It's just like, and why would you think we want to see this? Really think about it. Like, if they went full tilt into prequels and stuff like that on all of our favorite things, do we want to see G.I. Joe babies? Like the Muppet babies? Little baby Snake Eyes sitting there with Duke, right? I don't watch G.I. Joes. I'm just pulling that up as an example. Like, do we want to see them, toddlers in a special training school so that they can become elite soldiers at some point? Maybe the Cobra Commander will be in there too, but he's the one that he's the slightly nerdy kid that nobody wants to hang out with. Do we want to see that? Actually, that kind of does sound like an interesting show, but it's like, do we want to see this stuff? Like, would you really want to watch a full, like, think about a full movie of Orion Pax hero worshipping Megatron until Megatron betrays him and kills him, essentially, and he gets rebuilt as Optimus Prime? Would you want to watch a full movie of that? Sure, an episode in the G1 series where it's kind of showing, the start of the war. Sure, cool. I'm down. But an entire movie of it, I wouldn't want to watch that. Spider-Man, going back into that. Do you really want to see Spider-Man going to middle school and not being a hero? Maybe he could just be sitting there like, man, Iron Man's so cool. But see, when they do shows like that, he'll do something like, they'll have like a spider in the background, and he'll be like, dun dun dun, foreshadowing that he's going to become Spider-Man, and it's like, or like for Halloween he'll dress up like a spider or something like that, and it'll be so cheesy, and you'll just be like, really? And so yeah, that's my problem with prequels. It's like, it just, when they're done badly, it can ruin a series. It can ruin a movie. It can really hurt a movie because it's destroying the canon. It's making things not look right or feel right anymore. When they do it safely, I'm not saying correctly, when they do it safely, it's a no change status quo to what we've already established, like Obi-Wan, where it's like, you're back to exactly where all the pieces were at the beginning of the show. Nothing has changed. But when they do it correctly, it can enhance the story and make things more interesting. Like, Palpatine was always one of my favorite villains, but because of the prequel series, he became my all-time favorite villain in movies. Because, he's fucking awesome. So it's like, that's why I was excited to see him in Episode 9, which I know a lot of people weren't. But my point is just like, if it's done right, it can really elevate a story. Like Rogue One, like I've said. If it's done wrong, you end up having to reboot the series. Like the Batman, the Batman movie. I thought the movie was pretty good, but if you're trying to sit there and tell me that it's the same universe as the Justice League stuff, I'm going to scratch my head, because that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Just absolutely none. And it was originally supposed to be about Batman from the Justice League, standalone movie, and kind of like a prequel. That's originally what it was supposed to be, and then because of this and that and the other thing, it got changed so many times that it turned into this, which I think this worked better, but it's just one of those like, huh? So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think of prequels? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you fear them? I'm more into the fear category. I don't like them, but I do fear them too. I just, oof, they can really ruin a day. Which leads me to my next movie review, which is Prey, which is a prequel to the Predator series. I have not watched it yet. This is Friday, August 5th, so when I'm recording this. So I'm going to try to get this up Saturday the 6th, so I'm probably going to watch it tonight and see how I feel about it, and do a video of it. And I'll probably be up mid next week. But, I'm kind of afraid. It's just like, and there's another good example, like, of prequels, because while the Alien vs. Predator movies are technically sequels to the Predator movies, they're also prequels to the Alien movie. And if you look at the Alien movies in their world, including Prometheus, it does not make sense in a linear path anymore, because it shows like Prometheus and Covenant. I didn't watch Covenant, but they show the actual birth of the alien that we know. So, but this is saying that the Predators had those hundreds of years before. So it's like, that's where things are, like, it makes no sense. And, it just really hurts the story. So it's one of those, like, okay, maybe this might be good, maybe it won't, maybe they just kept it simple. How hard is a Predator movie to make? You put a Predator on Earth, have him hunt some people, have some cool scenes, and then you do it again. It's like, you don't need to throw in 10 Predators, you don't need to take them off world, you don't need to do some sort of Predator Civil War with giant battle suits for humans. You don't need to do all these weird things. It's like Predator 1 was so great because it was just so claustrophobic. Predator 2 was so great because, again, you're in that city and it made it feel just as claustrophobic as the jungle. I'm way off topic now. But it's just like, but then after Predator 2, it just went like more and more and more crazy. Now, like I said, I liked Alien vs. Predator. I like Requiem, and then I liked Predators. I thought those were all good movies. I do think the progression was weird, but then once you get into The Predator, I just sat there and just was like, this is garbage. This is hot garbage. This is, because they keep having to one-up each other. It's like, you don't need to one-up the Predator. It's like, just keep doing that. It's the same thing with the Terminator movies. I can't really say that they went off the rails with prequels, because they went all over the place. And it's like, I don't know what's going on timeline-wise. But it's like, Terminator 1, great. Terminator 2, great. One of the best action movies ever. Terminator 3, they tried to one-up Terminator 2. And then Terminator 4 went up, trying to up. They just keep upping the ante. And then it gets to finally, what was the last one? Dark Fate, and you're just sitting there like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Stupid. Anyway, sorry. Off topic there. But anyway, so yeah, hopefully this prequel to Predator will be good. Fingers crossed. I would like to just see a really good Predator movie again. But yeah, I guess that's all I got. What do you guys think of prequels?